St. Lawrence Boulevard reeks of garlic and quarrels and bill collectors. Orange crates, stuffed full with garbage and decaying fruit, are piled slipshod in most alleys. Swift children gobble pilfered plums, while slower cats prowl the fish market. Mordecai Richler. Welcome to Montreal Street Signs. Streets are like ribbons, aren't they? Tying cities together like elaborate gifts. And St. Lawrence, well, this is one gift that keeps on giving. Let's check it out. How remarkable is St. Lawrence Boulevard? The street is a National Historic Site, the only one in Montreal. Running north for 11 kilometers from the river up to Somerville Avenue, it's always divided the city physically, but also culturally. French to the east, English to the west. But the street, St. Lawrence, has always sort of danced to the beat of its own very unique drummer. Inaugurated in 1720, the Main, as it is often called, quickly became the first stop for immigrant communities. After the French, English, Scottish, and Irish came the Jewish community, followed by the Chinese and Italian, Portuguese, Greek, Arab, Haitian, and counting. Imagine the clatter of horse hooves, tram bells, car horns, train whistles, snow plows, jackhammers, fire engines, police sirens, and foghorns, providing the rhythm section for the music of 80 different languages. And you've imagined the soundtrack to 200 years of the Main's history. While live entertainment had existed for centuries, the first motion picture in Canada ever shown was right here at the corner of Vigier and St. Lawrence. The first talking picture was also shown at the Palace Theatre in 1928. And by the way, it sat 2,000 people. So eventually, executives decided to cut out the middleman and sell treats right inside of their own lobby. By World War II, half the popcorn sold in Montreal was consumed in theaters. Long before Montreal became this city of great streets, the woolly mammoth grazed our fields and forests. They ate wildflowers, including the meadow rose. Now you might ask what that fact has to do with the street today. Well, while the mammoth went extinct 10,000 years ago, the Montreal flower it grazed on did not. In fact, you can buy seeds to the meadow rose at any flower shop on the street. And oh, by the way, the modern meadow rose is known to attract butterflies and hardly any mammoths. The only one of its kind in Canada, the Montreal Chinese Hospital was built in 1918 to meet the needs of the community during the flu pandemic. In 1962, the City of Montreal declared the location unfit to serve as a medical institution. The following year, the Chinese community raised $1 million toward constructing a new facility. In 1969, it became a long-term care hospital, and today has 128 beds and is a member of the Quebec Hospital Association and is therefore publicly funded. No other Chinatown in Canada has as many as 4 welcoming gates, but ours does, called Pei Fangs. Chinatown in Montreal welcomes the 4 corners of the world. Now run by the National Theatre of Canada, the Monument National building was originally known as the heart of French America. Built in 1896, it became a cultural landmark of a different kind, with the country's first performance of a Yiddish play. Remarkably, until the 1940s, the Monument National was the second largest Yiddish theater in North America. Welcome to the historic Jewish Quarter. As early as 1871, a Jewish enclave numbering some 400 people settled around the corner of St. Lawrence and Dorchester. The area would become the main destination of the 125,000 Jews that settled in Canada between 1905 and 1920. Eventually, Montreal became home to the third largest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the whole world.
Excuse me, sir. My viewing audience would like to know if you could name the shortest street in the world.
Ebenezer Place in Scotland. Built in 1887, it's 6 feet 8 inches long and has one house address.
The first posted speed limit in history.
10 miles an hour. It was in the UK in 1861.
If you bury a speeding ticket, how long is it going to take to decompose?
4 weeks.
You guessed right.
I gotcha. Relax, relax.
Just about every major city in the world has a red light district. Gambling, illicit taverns, and ladies of the night mark our history, mostly due to American prohibition and Montreal's status as a port city. The southern section of the Main especially has been home to cabarets and illegal businesses as early as the 19th century and was a thriving concern between 1925 and the early 1960s. In fact, the city's first nightclub murder took place among the shooting galleries and tattoo parlors at the Dreamland Cabaret, right around this spot, in 1925. In 1957, an ex-mental patient was dubbed the Mad Sniper of the Main for shooting on 3 people from his rooming house window. They all recovered, but the street's reputation did not, earning it the headline, "The city's most hardened artery." You know how I love to have a guest host on to discuss the theme of an episode, and the theme today, crime. I have cultural historian, the notorious Velma C. with us today. We're very fortunate to discuss all things criminal in the history of Montreal. And I'd like to begin, Velma, with the introduction of females into the police force.
Well, it's a pretty interesting history, but a very short history. The first female police matrons came to be and hired in Montreal around 1890s. And there was a study later on done around 1910 to discuss about the issue of whether there should be female police officers. And from there, 1918 were the first 4 female police officers hired in the city of Montreal to oversee the morals of young ladies in the city and supervise against vices and immoral activities of the evening.
You know, you bringing up females on the good side of the law, well, it makes me wonder. Do you have any stories about ladies on the other side?
Well, there were certainly some very powerful madames of the city. There were 3 of them in particular, Mrs. Ida Katz, Liliane Le Juif, and Madame Bizette. And between the 3 of them, they controlled all the bordellos of Montreal and would decide who would get arrested and when, and by which police officer. And they would bring their receipts to the bank, being accompanied by the local police force. In their fur coats and in their Cadillacs with their receipts from the night before. So quite a scene to see on the streets of Montreal.
And how about interesting stories? The type of stories that pop about the city of Montreal's criminal activity?
Well, one particular one would be perhaps Montreal's notorious female bank robber, Monica Lamitraille, Machine Gun Molly. And some people have said if Al Capone could have had a daughter, it would have been Machine Gun Molly. And why was this so? Well, she grew out of the poor slums of Montreal in desperate conditions. Her family was already the 4th generation pickpockets and thieves, and her grandmother ran a school for pickpocketing. And so the kids would give the grandmother a cut of their take of the day. So Monica grew up in these circumstances, and at age 17 she married a Scottish gangster, and she had 2 children. When he was deported, she was desperate. She had no money. She had no life skills to speak of. She had 2 children to feed. And she had a boyfriend. She then later on had a boyfriend, and he introduced her to bank robberies. And she became the mastermind. She was so good and so smart and so aggressive at what she was able to do. She would wear disguises to the banks and be dressed completely conservatively off bank robbery times. And her gang robbed over 20 banks and gained about $100,000, which was a lot of money in that time.
Wow.
Unfortunately, she died in a high-speed chase and ended her career. Her last bank robbery was supposed to fund her new retirement in Florida. So
Yeah,
a little bit of a sad ending.
There's so many Montrealers.
Yes.
Is there not a sad, tragic story about the penalty, the death penalty in Montreal, that changed things forever?
Yes, it certainly did. Public hangings, at least in Montreal particularly, came to a gruesome end in 1935 with the hanging of a female prisoner, Teresa. And the hangman was supposed to have physically seen her and gotten her measurements, her height and weight. However, the prison warden refused to have him come and visit, so he had sent the hangman what he thought were the measurements and the height and weight of the female prisoner. Unfortunately for everyone involved, this woman had gained over 35 pounds, which completely changes the calculations involved in hanging.
Wow.
So when the rope and the trap door were opened and released, the head remained with the rope, the body fell to the floor
Oh my Lord.
with a big resounding smash.
So what ends up happening in the city after an event like that?
After that, no public hangings, although the scaffold remained suspiciously high and above the jail walls for people to still see. The last official hangings and death penalty in Canada occurred in 1962 with the double hanging in Toronto of 2 prisoners, male prisoners.
You couldn't possibly have been more charming, Belmacy. I want to thank you very much for coming out and visiting with us today.
The pleasure's all mine.
Oh, how adorable. You handcuffed us together so I couldn't get away from you.
Yeah, I'm all yours, Houdini.
Hey, I'm keeping the cuffs. No, I'm not. It's illegal. I wouldn't do well in prison.
Opened in 1892, the Eden Museum entertained and horrified for nearly half a century before being torn down in 1940. The Eden was a wax museum, proud of a cast of recreated characters that ranged from Joan of Arc to Jack the Ripper. The celebrated amusement center spared no expense reproducing history, including huge tableaus of Jacques Cartier's discovery of Canada and the battle on the Plains of Abraham. Had the directors of the museum focused on historic scenes, they might still be operating today. But much wax was spilled in the Freaks of Nature section on such things as mummies from Mexico, Satan roasting a sinner, and the actual skeleton of a child born with a tail. Even these might have escaped condemnation had the directors not focused their marketing on amusing and instructing young people. Instructing youngsters to do what, I imagine? The 2006 census revealed that 46,000 Portuguese people lived in Montreal. Here in Little Portugal, they gather to watch international soccer matches, read newspapers from home, and enjoy some home-cooked dishes.
Among the many spots to relax along the Main is this delightful Parque de Portugal. The Portuguese community settled here in 1953 and left a delightful plaque over there which reads, "We arrived in this area seeking a new life and ample horizons." And I'm glad you're here.
From the moment this city was founded in 1642, fire proved a fiercer enemy to Montrealers than the Iroquois. 3 times in our history, fire has threatened to turn the entire city into ash. Originally, Montreal fires were dealt with by the military. Then, in the 19th century, fire clubs began to appear. A permanent fire department wasn't organized until 1863. And by the way, Montreal didn't welcome its first female firefighter until 1990.
All this information, plus much more, can be found right here at the Montreal Firefighters Museum, which, by the way, is still fully operational.
Founded in 1868, the Montreal Football Club was Canada's first organized football team. The Expos were our first Major League Baseball club, and the Habs are the winningest team in NHL history. North America's first YMCA was built here, and the Montreal Insectarium is the largest on the continent. A ship built in Montreal was the first to cross the Atlantic entirely on steam. We had this country's first Olympics and a World's Fair attended by 50 million tourists. Even the word Canada originated in Montreal.
Why do I mention all this? Because none of it matters to the inhabitants of the Maine. Here, all that matters are the bagels.
Introduced by Polish immigrants after World War I, Montreal bagels are uniquely boiled in honey-sweetened water and baked in a wood-fired oven, all within full view of customers. And just off the Main are the St. Viator and Fairmount bagel shops, the best tasting bagels in the world.
So which one's better, right? How about a taste test? As you can see, I've done everything possible to get you the answer. These volunteers are presently chowing down on both a St. Viator and Fairmount bagel. You might be interested to know that these bagels have been shipped to every continent on Earth, but only one has been to space. Montreal astronaut Gregory Chamatov actually delivered them, home delivered them on the space shuttle to the International Space Station. Which ones? The Fairmount bagel. Remember, there are no winners, but there will be one huge loser. Okay, let's end this once and for all. Drum roll, please. All right. So, tell me, which is the best tasting bagel in the whole world? English, please. Well, you heard it here first, and I'm as surprised as you are. The best tasting bagel in Montreal is... Son of a pumpkin pancake, you can take an eyeball out with that. Get over here, you get over here. What? Where are you? Get. Mile End begins where the Golden Square Mile ends, traditionally separating the gentry from the immigrants. Now, the gentry of the time were the Brits and the Scots. The immigrants, the Irish. Typically, the Irish community centered on a church. In this case, St. Michael's behind me. Now, this beautiful structure was actually based on a basilica from Istanbul.
Built in 1914, it would grow to become the largest Anglophone parish in Montreal. In 1964, a Polish contingent moved into the neighborhood, and the church name was expanded to St. Michael and St. Anthony in a welcoming gesture.
Hosting this series has been a real eye-opener for me. I can honestly say now, I know Montreal like I know the back of my hand. What the heck is that on the back of my... What is that on my... Excuse me, can you tell what that is on the back of my hand?
An expert on Montreal, are you?
It's Miss Kaylee, and she looks upset about something.
Can you tell me how many bridges Montreal has to the mainland?
4.
7. Now, I have a question. The air you breathe, the water you drink, what your world looks like, who doesn't understand that everything you litter follows you around for the rest of your life?
That sounds like it would explain a lot. Montreal has the second largest Italian population in Canada, most of them arriving after World War II. They came here in the St. Lawrence area because they already had a parish waiting for them. It had been built by the first Italian community in Canada in 1860.
In 1918, this devotion had been rewarded with a magnificent National Historic Site, the Church of the Madonna, inspired by typical Italian parish churches from the Renaissance era.
Sections of the Main are often closed off for street festivals, including Grand Prix weekend every June. Fun fact, there are only 2 cities in North America where you can't turn right on a red light: Montreal and New York City. Reason? I think for the elderly. Make sure we can make it from one curve to the next. Having fun yet? You better be, because Montreal has thousands of streets, and I haven't even got this thing out of first gear yet. Oh! Let it go of the steering wheel, let it go of the steering wheel, let it go of the steering wheel.
Well, my favorite street is probably St. Viator Street because I've been here for almost a decade.
It's Saint Laurent because it's just so diverse from north to south.
Beauvd Street.
Atwater, it's a very lively street and it's very beautiful in the summer as well.
De Maisonneuve is where I live.
The first one that came in my mind is St. Catherine.
Crescent Street.
I would say the mountain because for me it's representative of Montreal.